But let's go back to View of the Hebrews now. That was kind of a bit of a lengthy dive into what informs the View of the Hebrews. Why did you go, when I asked you what gave Joseph Smith the idea to create the Book of Mormon, you went straight to 1823 and the Book of View of the Hebrews. So I know now that you're not claiming that the Book of Mormon is a plagiarism of the View of the Hebrews, but what is it about the View of the Hebrews coming out in 1823 that you think gives Joseph the idea to create the Book of Mormon?
Okay, well, so in 1823, we don't know what he was saying about the origin of the Indians yet either.
Meaning Joseph.
Yeah, in 1823, we know he's telling stories about the ancient inhabitants as if he lived among them all his life. We don't know if he was connecting it to saying the Indians were Hebrew. We don't know really what the content of the Book of Mormon is going to be until later, when he's just before he starts dictating it. So View of the Hebrews is still pertinent, but when he starts talking about digging up a record and what made him go to the record, I'm using Solomon Spaulding, View of the Hebrews, and others that talk about possible Indian book, legends of Indian books, and his own way of solving the problem, which was the book to him in 1823 was a way of solving family dispute over religion. So he was, like I suggested before, telling his family what the book was about, of what was written on the book without getting the book, before he would even get the book. So he knew he could talk about the contents, whatever it was, without actually getting the book in 1823. So I think this is something original. Joseph Smith confronted with a similar solution or similar problem as Solomon Spaulding and Ethan Smith. And his solution is to find a book with writing on it. How else are you going to do it, you know?
And I think I remember a version of View of the Hebrews even saying something to the effect of, wouldn't it be amazing if a book was found that goes into more depth in explaining the origins of the mound builders? Do I have that right? That even View of the Hebrews sort of has a place where it's calling for the creation of another book.
Well, the problem is the want of evidence. So Ethan Smith is frustrated that there isn't this conclusive evidence of the Hebrew origin of the Indian. So Joseph Smith's confronted with how do I prove to my family, certain theological, how do I solve certain theological problems? And this is what he worked out in his mind and prayed about. And this is the solution. He got this as, this is how I can answer my father's universalism. This is how I can prove that, Jesus is God, not just, the Son of God, Unitarianism, in other words. So the family is disputing over religion, arguing about religion. And one psychological aspect of Joseph Smith that still radiates to Mormonism today is that he's intolerant of religious controversy. He's intolerant of, it's a loss of the spirit in his mind. Whereas some people would think that, that's vibrant and that's life and debate and stuff was a good thing. He saw it as a hindrance to spirituality. And so he couldn't stand this conflict and he wanted it to stop. And this is how he figured out how to stop it. So today, Mormons, they're not, if you bring up anything that doesn't support, or isn't, if you bring up anything that is negative in their view, that doesn't support a positive direction the church is moving in or whatever, they will feel bad. They have bad feelings, and they will cut you off, and that will be it, because they can't tolerate religious controversy. The average Mormon I'm talking about.
And you're saying that goes all the way back to Joseph Smith's temperament. Yeah.
It's that, and he could not stand it. Even if somebody criticized him, he would lash out like a lion. One friend of his, Benjamin Johnson, if anybody criticized him, he would lash out like a lion. He couldn't tolerate conflict or criticism. And to him, the spirit was peaceful and without
joy and peace and love and
one heart. Zion to Joseph Smith was when all the believers were of one heart, and it's a utopian view. It's a unrealistic view of the world that he was trying to impose on others, and manipulate others to adhere to, for his view of what spirituality was like.
And so do you believe that as early as 1820, so you believe that the release of the view of the Hebrews, do you envision Joseph Smith actually seeing the book, learning about the book, potentially even reading the book? That's part one. And then part two is, do you see his revealing to his family that he's found golden plates in a hill as him actually saying, I'm going to write the book that the view of the Hebrews envisions and others, and me telling this story about the golden plates is going to be the beginning of how I end up writing the book? Do you envision it being that specific with Joseph Smith?
I don't see him as being an avid reader of any kind, except for the Bible. It's what you can only talk about what the evidence shows, really. And you can't prove that he read any book besides the Bible, really. These things are in the air. He doesn't have to read them. He could be hearing people talk about them, ministers talk about them, traveling lecturers. He was in a debating club. People in his day knew a lot more about theology than the average person today. And he was a deep thinker, original thinker. He heard these controversies. I mean, they're in his house, really. And so he can't really get away from them. His father and mother have two different views of religion. And it's all around him. I mean, that's, people talked about theology and theological solutions to problems all the time. But he went through a period in his life, according to 1832 history, from the age of 12 to 15. He read the scriptures, he pondered them. He concluded eventually that there was a God, because the universe is ordered, because the universe is ordered and the planets are ordered. That's evidence that there's a God, and the fool says in his heart that there's no God. So, but he heard a lot about deism. Now, deism was also Unitarian in a way, that it believed in God, one God, and Jesus was just the Son of God, not in a literal sense. And deists like Thomas Paine, he wrote The Age of Reason. And remember this, I don't know if you remember the story of Asaph Smith. When Lucy and Joseph Smith Sr. were in Vermont, they started attending Methodist revivals, which made Asaph Smith angry. And he took Thomas Paine's Age of Reason and threw it into their house, saying, "Read this until you believe it." So, but Thomas Paine went meticulously through the Bible, showing all the contradictions, all the problems of the Bible. And Joseph Smith was in the Book of Mormon trying to answer these contradictions and problems. He was also trying to answer them in his revision of the Bible from 1830 to 1833. He worked on revising the Bible and trying to resolve many of these contradictions. Well, so I believe he heard probably from the deists that the book of Deuteronomy was a pious fraud. And so Joseph Smith got the idea, I believe, that if Deuteronomy is a pious fraud and it's in the Bible and it helps people, then I can do it. And I think that's where he got his idea of Pseudepigrapha, where he will produce Pseudepigrapha himself that people will believe, and the Bible's canonized, and people believe it, yet here's this book in there that's probably pseudepigraphic.
Okay. And that, by the way, you remind me of something else. I mentioned, this list that Bryce Blakenagel puts together of and I think that he gets from the Tanners of 30 other books. I'm sure that attempt to explain native mound builder origins. Your first book deals with that in depth, right?
Yeah. In 1986. 1986.
Long time ago, yeah. But several, as I understand it, several of these books quote Isaiah. And so even the idea of quoting Isaiah is not original to Joseph Smith. Many of these, including View of the Hebrews, quotes Isaiah extensively as a part of their book to explain the origins of the mound builders, correct?
Well, Ethan Smith, he quoted a part that I don't think the Book of Mormon quoted, though.
No. But idea, we not only have other people writing books, claiming trying to explain the origins of the Native Americans, that there were light-skinned and a dark-skinned, all that we already have 30 times over. Some of these books are even quoting Isaiah. It's not important, again, whether Joseph quotes the same part of Isaiah as these other books. I'm just saying some of these other books even go as far as to quote Isaiah as a part of the book. That's all I'm saying.
Right.
But talk quickly about how Deuteronomy is supportive of the idea of a pious fraud, and how you think that then leads Joseph to feel okay about this idea of pseudepigrapha, which is writing as if you're some ancient author.
Yeah, well, Thomas Paine said, the Bible itself says that it was discovered in the walls of the temple when the Jews returned to Jerusalem. But it was actually written by, the priestly document, if you remember, David Bokovoy. Yeah, that there's the Yahwist and the Elohist and the priestly documents. And the Deuteronomy is a repetition of the law, and where they wrote, the priests actually were able to put in the new priestly community's legitimacy comes from this book. So, and that grew up when Israel was away from the temple, actually, in Babylon. The priestly community took over. And so when they came back, then they wanted to legitimize themselves and legitimize Jerusalem as the place and all that. So, according to Thomas Paine, he said that Ezra, the next book, actually, the scribe is probably the person who wrote the book of Deuteronomy. Of course, Thomas Paine didn't know anything about the documentary hypothesis, but the seeds of it were there. And so I believe that could, if Joseph Smith knew that story, that could have been part of the idea of around writing in behalf of other people, new doctrine. That was the purpose of the Book of Mormon, was to put down false doctrine. And the original purpose of the Book of Mormon, when Joseph Smith started off, was to reform the Christian churches, to put down the debates that Joseph Smith, when I was talking earlier about he was intolerant of conflict, religious conflict especially, because of his family. He was intolerant of sectarianism, of the strife, sectarian strife. In his 1838 history, he puts that down. He criticizes sectarian strife, priests contending against priests, convert against convert, so that all their good feelings one for another, if they ever had any, were entirely lost in a strife of words and a conflict about opinion. That's what he says. So, the Book of Mormon, before Joseph Smith started to dictate the Book of Mormon in March 1829, when Harris comes seeking a greater witness, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation, D&C 5, that said that in the original wording said that he was to pretend to no other gift besides translating. So at this point, he doesn't see anything really beyond dictating the Book of Mormon. He doesn't imagine a church being founded or even a New Jerusalem government with him as the leader, or the choice seer in the latter days. That all comes in the process of translating. Towards the end of the translation, he's talking about, founding a church. He's giving, even when Jesus comes and preaches to the Nephites, he forgets some things that are essential to starting a church, like the words for the sacrament, which he adds later in the Book of Moroni. So then when he comes around to the beginning and starts dictating the replacement for the lost 116 pages from the small plates of Nephi, instead of the large plates, he puts in a prophecy about himself, that he's, the choice seer in the latter days, who shall have a scribe and a spokesperson for him, and goes into vast detail. He has ancient Joseph predict Joseph Smith's coming. So he puts himself right there in Scripture, ancient Scripture, in a pseudepigraphic book or prophecy written by ancient Joseph that Lehi's referring to from the brass plates. By that time he finished with the Book of Mormon, his vision is expanded, beyond all scope, and the narcissistic Joseph Smith is really starting to show, and he has no bounds on his narcissism, because he's going to found a New Jerusalem. New Jerusalem's going to establish a theocracy throughout the United States and then throughout the whole world, and he's going to be the leader of it. So that, if that isn't a delusional narcissistic dream, I don't know what would be.
Okay. And so that and so just to tie this back to kind of some of the questions we wrote out. You do believe View of the Hebrews wasn't a source of plagiarism, but was maybe the publication of View of the Hebrews jostled into Joseph's mind the idea of writing a book like the Book of Mormon. But it certainly wasn't a source of plagiarism, and he may have not even read it.
Don't know, but the View of the Hebrews is a good candidate because not word plagiarism, but plagiarism maybe of idea.
Of ideas. Okay.
Of ideas. So, and that's the thing, that when you do your computer searches on the internet and you search these thousands of books, you only pick up language similarities, not idea borrowings. Also, the Great War.
That's a downside of the word print analysis stuff, because what you really want to look for are ideas reappearing and the frequency and the strength of the reappearing of ideas, not actual phrases or sentences that would indicate plagiarism, because you're arguing it was a verbally dictated book out of the imagination and knowledge of Joseph Smith, and thus was not a plagiarism. So trying to find a source for plagiarism is just missing the mark.
The same thing with his revelations. We know he's like reading tons of theological books and things. And recently, some researchers at BYU have discovered that he may have been influenced by Clark's commentaries for his revisions
to the
Bible, but so far I haven't seen any evidence for verbal plagiarism of Adam Clark, just ideas. So
right now, but then again, didn't you say he wasn't much of a reader? Or are you saying he becomes a reader later? He
becomes a reader later.
Okay.
And because he's educating himself. That's one of the reasons why I think he's doing the inspired revision, is because he's going through the Bible with Sidney Rigdon, a theologian, piece by piece, and educating himself along the way.
Okay,
He wants to be up there with the ministers. He wants to learn Hebrew. He wants to be competitive with other ministers out there.
But that's later. That's later. Okay. That's later. So let's go back to...
But even then.
Right.
You don't find plagiarism in his revelations.
Okay. And just to summarize a few of the other points we made in the previous interview, you think Joseph Smith was the single author. You think that there was nothing in his hat, no base manuscript shoved into his hat. You think it was primarily verbally dictated from his memory, and you could probably even say the Royal Skousen's Critical Text Project favors this idea of verbal dictation, not of having Joseph reading from a specific manuscript. Is that all? That's all true?
Right. So you can't say he didn't use some kind of manuscript or written text. We know his head's out of the Bible when he's out of the hat when he's dictating Isaiah, probably. The witnesses say that there were no books or manuscripts. Well, what they mean is he's not writing it from other sources. Now, if he took the Bible and he said, okay, on the plates, they quote these chapters of Isaiah here, just copy it from here. And he may have done it like he did the inspired revision, where maybe he took the Bible and he wrote little changes through the Urim and Thummim or through the seer stone. He made changes and he goes, okay, copy this. And they copy it. So they wouldn't have seen that as, oh, that's the source, because it's quoting the Bible. Nobody's going to dispute that the Book of Mormon is quoting the Bible. They're trying to answer the question, did he have a manuscript like Spaulding's manuscript? David Whitmer and Emma Smith, they're responding to, no, there was no manuscript. And this is the thing about the Spaulding theory. They did not know the particulars of how the Book of Mormon was dictated. That's why the Spaulding theory thrived for so long, was that the witnesses hadn't described how it was done. Because if they knew how it was done, it would have been harder to assert the Spaulding theory. The Spaulding theory thrived because they were trying to explain how this dumb farmer could produce a book, and it had to be some other learned person over here doing the writing, and Joseph Smith was just a patsy or whatever, the salesperson of the manuscript. Well, they bought into Joseph Smith's own apologetic. He and his followers put out Joseph Smith wasn't educated enough to dictate the Book of Mormon. But when you study Joseph Smith, you learn that he was, a lot of people described him as even smarter than Sidney Rigdon, and but less polished. That Joseph Smith's sermons, they weren't polished like Sidney Rigdon's, but they were nevertheless superior in content and emotional appeal to Sidney Rigdon's. So the Book of Mormon is exactly what you would expect. That it's not high literature, it's not that hugely eloquent in the polished way that Sidney Rigdon would have done it. It's still eloquent and they describe Joseph Smith. He had this crude eloquence, they called it, a crude eloquence, an unpolished eloquence, and that he used too many words, which is another thing the Book of Mormon shows, that too many words to express their ideas. Well, so in the dictation, and this is where the recent BYU studies came out, and there's an essay in there by Jack Welch, one of the leading apologists. He goes through the timeline for dictating, and he comes out with a similar but more detailed position than what I articulated last time. But he gives a graph on one of the pages. He gives a graph where it shows the maximum number of days, 75 days he has. And from April 7th to the end of June is about 86 days. And he takes off 11 days for trips, for dictating revelations and other things. Some of them I don't agree with, but I'll go with the taking off 11 days with 75 days. Then across the bottom here, he shows 10 words per minute, 15 words per minute, or 20 words per minute. And he said that they could do 20 words per minute comfortably, where they experimented and they would read to a person and they would write it down and read it back. And then the Joseph Smith person playing the Joseph Smith would say correct and then move on and read the next group. And they used Skousen's manuscript where he divided it into the bites of words, the 20 words where he speculates from the actual dictated manuscript that around 20 words, Joseph Smith would read about 20 words at a time. And so 20 words per minute would give you, for the 75 days, 3 hours a day. Okay, 3 hours a day it would take to do that on average, broken up, however Joseph Smith wanted to break it up. So that would be the fastest. But at 15 words per minute, you would have, for 75 days, he doesn't show that here for some reason, but 75 days would be 4.5 hours it would take. So, and if it were 10 words, which is the slowest, where there'd be lots of hesitation for him to think, you would have 6 hours a day. So what does he do in the other hours of the day? So he could be out in the woods praying. He could be memorizing passages out of the Bible. He could be thinking,
working out the story, right?
Working out the story. And for the large part, the history of the book is sparse, really. It's like scaffolding, and Joseph Smith hangs sermons here and there on it, and and Mormon's commentary, historical commentary on Mormon basically has a providential view of history, much like the Puritans had. Mormon his comments would be, and thus this shows, and then he would say, oh, this shows that, the Lord is not with them, or they were blessed and because they obeyed the commandments. And he gives these little commentaries on the history as you go through. And if you look really close it's a year by year backwards, up till the time of Christ. Each year, it's kind of drudgery from Mosiah on, because it goes year by year by year backwards, and they're not connected. Most of the years are not connected to what was said previously. They stand alone, each one, or there might be 2 or 3 years connected. That's it. So nothing that is unmanageable or overly complex. The same thing with the names in the Book of Mormon. You have like 144 unique names, and most of them are never repeated ever again. They're used once or in a little area and never again. So it doesn't take much memory to keep up with those names that he's inventing. So it's nothing that he can't handle for the time-wise. The idea that he never goes back and makes changes, well, why would you? You're dictating this, and each thing is connecting with the other. There are indications where he backs up and restates things and corrects them that way. That's a clue to it being an oral manuscript. But we do know that he made changes in the 1837 edition anyway. So it's like he made theological changes from, Mary was the mother of God to Mary, the mother of the Son of God, things like that.
So for those who want to claim, oh my gosh, he did all this in one fell swoop and then never made any changes, one important part of a response to that apologetic is they do make doctrinal changes in subsequent editions of the book, not just grammar and punctuation changes.
Right. Well, one time they changed, I think I mentioned this before, was it referred in the Book of Ether back to Benjamin having the gift of seeing, and then it changed it to Mosiah. And so there are those kinds of changes, but there's no need to make changes. I mean, we have, automatic writers who experience automatic writing where it feels like the words are coming from without. It's sort of like tongues. People speak in tongues. It's kind of an automatic speaking where they speak and they don't have full control of what the sounds that they're making. When it's automatic, they say that's the Spirit help them do it. So you have automatic writers, examples of automatic writers that dictate long manuscripts and never go back and change. We have little 16-year-old boy in Nauvoo had a stone, Revelations from Moroni. His name was James Colin Brewster. He dictated Revelations also. Sounds very much like Isaiah, like he took Isaiah and put it in a grinder and it came out like, here it is. James Colin Brewster got a following that went off to found a utopian society somewhere, in the western wilderness from Nauvoo. So Joseph Smith is not unique. You have the Quran is a very interesting example. The Quran even challenges readers to produce a revelation like the least of the revelations in the Quran, and if you can't, you have to believe it. So there are examples of other people. So we don't have to accept any challenge, because there are others who have actually done it in the past. There's certain things that can't be repeated the same way in history anyway.
Talk about the Nephi versus Moroni confusion or controversy. We didn't really touch on that in our last interview.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Yeah, I didn't want to get too much off track in the other interview because it is a complex question. And so the first real mention, Joseph Smith mentions a Moroni in his 1832 history, but not as the, he mentions Moroni as the main writer, actually, of the Book of Mormon. But in 1834, when Oliver Cowdery's writing the history with Joseph Smith's help, he mentions that he's rehearsing the words of Moroni. So it's 1835. It could be 1835 he finally mentions the name. So, because he has 7 letters, but to W.W. Phelps. But he says it's Moroni. Then the one source that names Nephi is the history of the church. And all the other sources that critics usually cite are reliant on the 1838 official history that Joseph Smith was involved with, especially in the early part when he's doing his history.
So when the church history mentions Nephi, it's mentioning Nephi as having done what?
Appeared in the room. Nephi's the one that appeared in the room, and there's no way to reconcile the two names like, Nephi's the one in the room and Moroni's the one on the hill. Because Joseph Smith says that the same messenger appears, and it's a contradiction. There's no getting around it. It's a contradiction. But the question is it intentional or is it by accident? Was it by accident and he just didn't have his story right because he can't keep his story straight because he's making it up as he goes, which is rare for charismatic leaders. Charismatic leaders are known to have, first of all, great memories. And second of all, when they tell their personal stories, they do it almost word for word every time. And so it's not like, to me, likely to be an accident. I think it was an intentional change, and this is my reasoning why it may have been an intentional change. When Joseph Smith's dictating the 1838 history, he is in Missouri. He is just come to Missouri. They're in Far West. He intends on publishing this probably in the Elders Journal, but that gets thwarted because of the war between the Missourians and Mormons, Joseph Smith's incarceration in Liberty Jail, and he doesn't get back to the history project until he gets to Nauvoo. But when he's doing this, there's a passage in the history where he says Nephi appeared to him, but then when he gave the plates back, he says, I gave the plates back, and he has them to this day, the 2nd of May, 1838. Then, so we know that he's dictating this or working on this around the 2nd of May, where he's saying it's Nephi. Well, on the 8th of May, 6 days later, he is working on a thing he calls answers to questions that appeared in the Elder's Journal, where he answers things like, "Oh, did you, how much did you get paid or were you a money digger? Did you steal your wife, Emma?" Things like that. Well, one of the questions was, where did you get the Book of Mormon? And Joe Smith is saying these are questions he's being asked all the time, so he decides to answer them once and for all and stop asking me these questions. Well, of course, he's making some of these questions up, but he says that he got the plates from Moroni, not Nephi. And this is only 6 days later, okay? He got them from Moroni, and he adds a very interesting statement. Who was dead, but raised again, and that's who gave the plates to me. So he's making a point of saying that Moroni was raised again from the dead. Well, why would he be making this point? And that would be that he's trying to combat the charge that he's a necromancer, that he speaks to spirits, and that it was a spirit who revealed the plates, which would connect it to necromancy, which is forbidden by the Bible. And he's trying to write his history, actually, to appeal to a larger Christian audience. That's why he's suppressing all the magical parts, all the folk magic, and changing, the seer stone, never mentions the seer stone, but changing it to Urim and Thummim. He's trying, and it's an angel, not a spirit. Well, I think he was experimenting with who appeared as the angel. And the problem with the Moroni designation, though, is that Moroni died after Jesus' resurrection, and so it would be more complicated to try to explain how Moroni was raised from the dead. Nephi, on the other hand, died before Jesus' resurrection, so Moroni would have been among the resurrected and would have had a body. So he may have been experimenting somewhat with the who it was that appeared to him. That's a possibility. That's how I've tried to.
And if somebody says, "Oh, either Joseph just accidentally used the wrong word," we all do it all the time, or if somebody says, "Oh, a scribe must have written down the wrong word," I guess those are both theoretically possible, right?
Yeah.
But in your mind, what you just said is the more likely scenario.
I don't know if it's likely. It's just a possibility that in the history, he's trying really hard to change the story anyway, and suppressing the magic parts to make it more appealing to a wider Christian audience, so that he doesn't get charged with necromancy. I think he thinks he'll change the name to Nephi so that he has a body. But then 6 days later, he gives Moroni the body, even though it's harder to explain, but yet it's probably firmly established with his Mormon audience. Whereas I think he's writing
Right. Okay. Beautiful. So, are you there, Dan? I think we may have lost Dan for a second. Hopefully we will get him. Okay, sorry, I got booted for a second. Are you still there, Dan?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, all right. Sorry.
I wasn't sure you were there.
I'm here. My computer booted me out for a second. Okay, cool. Well, go ahead.
1838 history.
What's that?
The 1838 history is important to understand the context in which it was written. It's an apologetic history. It begins where Joseph Smith claims, I will be telling the whole truth, nothing but the truth, and in righteousness, he says. But then a couple of pages later, he's saying he's forced to be telling this history because of the false rumors that had been put into circulation concerning him and the origin of the church. Only a few pages later, he is lying about the money digging or being dishonest and making it appear that he was just an ordinary digger. So, and then it goes on, and he's trying to, he never answers Hurlbut or E.D. Howe or any of their affidavits, his former relatives in Pennsylvania or his former neighbors. He just calls them liars, basically. But in this history, he is not forthcoming about his former history. So, but he tries to reshape it and make it appealing to the Missourians. And he emphasizes his being persecuted from a young age. He was persecuted after telling his first vision story. He was persecuted as soon as he started preaching, the first time he started preaching in Colesville. And so he's tapping into persecution to tell his followers that he has been persecuted also for Jesus's name's sake, and that to encourage them in the persecution that they're experiencing right there and then in Missouri. So I believe that's an important thing to keep in mind. That's why in the first vision there's such condemnation from Jesus, that their creeds are an abomination in his sight. Well, it's Joseph Smith telling the Missourians that they're persecuting him because they believe in false creeds.
Got it. Okay. Well, that's thank you. That's an important question that many people were asking about the Nephi-Moroni controversy. So thanks for touching on that.